He fixed an old woman's house. What the veteran and his dog got in return was a miracle. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wind howled through the empty streets of the small town of Woodsville. It was late November, and the chill of the coming winter had already taken hold. Nolan Creed, a 40-year-old Army veteran, trudged along the wet sidewalk, his boots heavy with the weight of not just the rain-soaked road, but also his own memories. His face, roughened by time and hardship, held the quiet stoicism of a man who had seen the worst of what life had to offer. Beside him, his loyal German shepherd, Ash, kept pace, his amber eyes scanning the streets with alertness, as if sensing something was amiss. Nolan hadn't planned to stop in Woodsville. He had been drifting for months, ever since the weight of his past had become too much to bear. After his service, everything seemed to fall apart. Jobs, relationships, a home. But there was something about this small town, something that drew him in despite himself. He had been walking for hours through the downpour when the smell of fresh bread reached his nose. It was faint, but enough to pull him off the street and towards the warm glow of a shop window. He stopped at the door of a small bakery, its sign reading Sugar Pine Bakery, and peered inside. The light was dim, but the flicker of an old-fashioned hanging bulb cast a soft glow on the wooden counter inside. He had seen countless bakeries in his time, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the warmth that seemed to spill out from the cracks in the door, or maybe it was the way the place felt stuck in time. The door creaked as Nolan pushed it open, the bell above the entrance ringing softly. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting scent of cinnamon, sugar, and something else he couldn't quite place. An elderly woman stood behind the counter, her hands deftly working with dough. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and her hands, though worn with age, moved with a grace that spoke of years of practice. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Welcome, young man," she said, her voice warm yet tinged with the wisdom of someone who had lived a long life. "I don't get many visitors in this storm." Nolan nodded, his throat tight. "Just looking for some shelter," he replied. "And maybe a cup of coffee." "I'm afraid we don't have coffee," the woman said with a chuckle. "But I can offer you something much better, fresh bread and a warm fire." She gestured to the back of the shop, where a cozy fireplace crackled softly. Nolan hesitated for a moment, then followed her. "I'm Maeve Holloway," she introduced herself, her eyes twinkling as she set a loaf of warm bread on a plate in front of him. "What's your name, dear?" "Nolan," he replied, taking a seat by the fire. "Thank you for the bread." "You're welcome, dear," Maeve said, her voice soft. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Nolan looked at her, surprised by her perception. She didn't wait for a reply. Instead, she stood up and began to tend to the stove. "I've seen many people come and go in my life, but it's rare to meet someone like you. You have a certain heaviness about you, as if you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you." Nolan stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the pendant around his neck, a small reminder of everything he had lost. "I've been carrying it for a long time," he said, his voice rough. Maeve didn't respond immediately. Instead, she returned to the counter, where her hands began to work with the dough once more. "I know what it's like to carry things," she said quietly. "But sometimes, the things we carry are meant to be shared." Just then, Ash let out a soft bark, his ears pricking up as if he had heard something Nolan had not. He looked over at his dog, who was staring intently at the corner of the bakery, his nose twitching. Maeve paused in her work and followed his gaze. "You know," she said, her voice taking on a more mysterious tone, "this place has a way of revealing secrets when the time is right. And sometimes, those secrets come in unexpected forms." She smiled at Nolan, as if she knew something he did not. Nolan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something more to this place, something he couldn't quite explain. And as the storm raged outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this quiet bakery, with its old wooden beams and flickering lights, would change everything he thought he knew about the world. I can still hear the soft crackle of the fire as Nolan sat by the warmth of the old hearth, his hands wrapped around the cup of tea Maeve had made for him. The storm had subsided, leaving the town of Woodsville wrapped in a blanket of silence. He sat there in the cozy bakery, Ash lying quietly by his feet, his thoughts drifting in a haze of comfort and uncertainty. Maeve had gone about her work, but there was an unspoken connection between them that Nolan couldn't quite understand. The woman had a way of making everything seem calm, as if the chaos of the world could be put on pause for a moment. The faint smell of cinnamon filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, Nolan felt something like peace. He had learned to be wary of peace after everything he had seen and lost. It felt fragile, like it might slip away the moment he grew too comfortable. Maeve seemed to sense his unease. "You know," she said softly, her hands moving effortlessly as she shaped the dough. "This bakery has been here for more years than I can count. And yet, it always feels like it has more to reveal." Nolan looked up at her, a faint curiosity flickering in his eyes. "More to reveal?" Maeve paused, her smile tinged with something almost wistful. "Yes, this place holds memories. The smell of the bread, the warmth of the oven, the old bell above the door. They all carry stories. And sometimes, when the time is right, they'll share those stories with the ones who need to hear them." Nolan didn't know why, but those words struck a chord with him. There was something about the bakery, something about Maeve, that made him feel like he had stumbled upon something far bigger than just a warm meal and shelter. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he had a sense that his life was about to change in a way he couldn't predict. As he sat there in the glow of the fire, Ash's ears suddenly perked up. Nolan felt the shift in the air before the dog even moved. Ash had always been tuned to something Nolan couldn't understand, some primal instinct that went beyond simple training. He looked at Ash, who was now staring at the floor near the oven. There was a low growl in the dog's throat, a sound that sent a chill through Nolan. The dog never growled like this, not unless there was something worth investigating. Nolan followed Ash's gaze, his own heart picking up pace. There, beneath the floorboards near the oven, a faint outline of something hidden was visible. Nolan stood slowly, his body reacting on its own. He bent down, running his hand along the floor, feeling the subtle shift of wood that didn't quite match the rest. He pressed harder, and a loose board gave way beneath his touch, revealing a small cavity below. Ash barked once, as if urging him on. With a few more swift movements, Nolan pried the board free, and what he found beneath the floor startled him. A small, weathered box, its surface covered in dust and grime, sat tucked away in the hidden space. It had the appearance of something ancient, as though it had been waiting there for decades, perhaps even longer. Nolan knelt, his heart beating faster now, as he carefully lifted the box from its resting place. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and when he turned it over, a faded engraving caught his eye. There was no mistaking it. The letters were barely visible, but Nolan could make out the word Halloway, etched into the surface. He froze, the box in his hands. He looked at Maeve, who had stopped working and was now watching him intently. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held a depth of emotion Nolan couldn't quite place. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Maeve's gaze softened. "That box," she said quietly, "has been in this bakery longer than I have. It belonged to my husband, Arthur. He made it for a reason, but I never knew why. He always said that when the time came, someone would find it. He believed the right person would know what to do with it." Nolan's mind raced as he held the box, unsure of what to think. It seemed impossible. What did this old bakery, this old woman, have to do with him? Why had the box remained hidden for so long? "You believe in fate, Nolan?" Maeve asked, her voice soft. He looked at her, and something in the way she asked made him pause. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "But I think something's happening here. Something I can't explain." Maeve nodded. "Sometimes, fate doesn't make sense. But it has a way of working things out. You just have to be open to it." She motioned for him to open the box. Nolan hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the lid. With a deep breath, he lifted it, revealing the contents inside. The first thing he noticed was a stack of old papers, yellowed with age. But beneath them, there was something much more intriguing. A set of keys, ancient and ornate, each one different from the others. And a small, faded photograph, tucked carefully into the corner of the box. Nolan picked up the photograph, his fingers trembling as he looked at the image. It was a picture of a large house, one that looked familiar, though he couldn't place it. The house was grand, sitting atop a hill, surrounded by trees. In the foreground stood a man, a woman, and a young child. Arthur, Maeve, and a child Nolan assumed was their daughter. The photograph had been taken years ago, but something about it felt significant. Nolan's heart raced as he stared at the photograph, the realization dawning on him. This house, this place, was connected to his own past. The mystery was just beginning, and Nolan could feel that his life was about to be changed in ways he could never have imagined. The soft light from the fireplace flickered as Nolan sat down on a worn chair, the box of keys and photographs still resting in his hands. He felt an odd weight in his chest, the image of the grand house on the photograph lingering in his mind. The house was familiar, yet he couldn't place it. A sense of recognition gnawed at him, but he couldn't figure out why. Maeve had returned to her work, but Nolan could feel her eyes on him, watching him closely, as though she was waiting for something to happen. He glanced at her, his voice low. "I need to know more. About this house, about all of this." Maeve nodded, a quiet understanding in her gaze. "It's time," she said softly. She motioned for Nolan to follow her. Without a word, he got up and followed Maeve through the bakery and to the back door. The air outside was cool, but not as cold as it had been before the storm. The town of Woodsville was quiet, the streets empty, with only the faint glow of lights in the distance. They walked together down a narrow path that led to the edge of the property, past the small garden where Maeve grew herbs for her baking. The small hill behind the bakery led to an old wooden fence, its paint chipped and weathered. Maeve stopped in front of a gate. "The house you saw in the photograph," she said, "it's just up that hill. It's been abandoned for a long time, but it belongs to us. To me, to my family." Nolan's mind raced. The house was real. It wasn't just a memory, and somehow it was connected to him, to his past. He had a feeling it wasn't a coincidence that he had ended up in this town, in this bakery, at this moment. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maeve smiled faintly. "Because it's your time. You were meant to find this. To unlock what's been hidden for years." Nolan looked at her, uncertainty written on his face. "Hidden? What do you mean?" "The house is not just a house," Maeve said, her voice soft and filled with nostalgia. "It holds the key to everything. It's more than a home. It's a place of memory, of love, and of loss. And it's time for you to discover it." Maeve reached out and opened the gate. As they walked up the hill, the trees around them seemed to grow taller, their branches reaching up toward the sky like silent sentinels. The wind was calm now, but there was an eerie feeling in the air, as if the world was holding its breath. The house came into view as they crested the hill. It was a grand old home, though it had seen better days. The roof was slightly slanted, and the paint on the walls had faded. But there was something beautiful about it, a charm that couldn't be ignored. It stood proudly at the top of the hill, surrounded by overgrown ivy and wildflowers. The windows were dark, as if the house itself was waiting for someone to open the door, to let the light back in. As they approached the house, Nolan felt a strange pull in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but it felt like the house was calling to him, beckoning him to uncover the secrets it held. Maeve led him to the front door. "This is it," she said. "The house will reveal itself when you're ready." Nolan hesitated, his hand resting on the doorknob. He felt a wave of nervousness wash over him, but at the same time, there was a sense of excitement. He had come this far, and now he had to know what was inside. He pushed open the door, and the hinges creaked in protest. The house was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the windows. Dust hung in the air, and the floor creaked beneath their feet. Nolan stepped inside, Ash following closely behind. Maeve stayed at the doorway, watching him. "You're the one who has to find it," she said. Nolan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a few steps further into the house, his eyes scanning the room. The walls were lined with old portraits and photographs, each one telling a story of a time long past. The furniture was covered in sheets, as if the house had been abandoned for years. But there was a sense of life here, of memories waiting to be remembered. He moved through the rooms, exploring each one. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It felt as if the very air was charged with something that Nolan couldn't quite put his finger on. He stopped in front of a large wooden bookshelf that took up an entire wall. It was filled with old books, their pages yellowed with age. As he reached out to touch one, he noticed a small keyhole hidden between the books. His fingers brushed against it, and for a moment, he could have sworn he heard a faint whisper. He pulled the book to the side and found a small metal key lodged in the wall. It was ancient, its edges worn smooth by time. He didn't know why, but he knew it was the key to something important. Maeve's voice called out from the doorway. "You found it," she said softly. "The key. It's time to open the door." Nolan looked at the key in his hand. This was it. He had uncovered the first piece of the puzzle. The mystery was only just beginning. The heavy wooden door creaked as Nolan turned the key, a sound that echoed through the empty house. He paused for a moment, his hand still on the door, as if the house itself was waiting for him to make the next move. He looked back at Maeve, who stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with a quiet anticipation. Nolan took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The air inside was cooler, and a faint musty smell clung to the corners of the room. It was different from the rest of the house, darker, older, as if this room had been sealed away from the world for decades. As he stepped inside, his eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw that the room was filled with old furniture, draped in white sheets. But there was something else in the room, something that caught his attention immediately, a large, ornate chest sitting against the far wall. The chest was made of dark wood, its surface intricately carved with patterns that Nolan didn't recognize. It looked ancient, like it had been there for centuries, untouched and hidden away. Nolan felt a pull toward it, an unexplainable desire to open it. He walked slowly across the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Ash, ever watchful, trotted beside him, his nose twitching as if he sensed something important about to happen. Nolan reached the chest and ran his fingers over the carvings. They felt smooth, worn by time, yet strangely alive, as if the chest itself was waiting for him to uncover its secrets. He glanced back at Maeve. "What's in it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maeve's gaze softened. "It's not what's inside the chest that matters," she said quietly. "It's what you find when you open it." Nolan frowned, confused, but didn't question her further. He reached down and lifted the latch on the chest. The moment his fingers touched the lock, there was a faint tremor. In the air, a shift in the house itself, as if the walls were holding their breath. With a soft click, the chest opened, revealing a collection of old books, papers, and a few small trinkets. But at the very top of the pile was a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and faded with age. Nolan picked it up carefully, his heart racing as he opened it. The pages inside were yellowed with age, but the handwriting was still legible. It was written in a careful script, with dates and names that seemed to span decades. Nolan scanned the first few pages, his eyes quickly moving over the words. He stopped when he reached a section with a large, faded map of the town. It was drawn by hand, and in the center was the very house they were standing in. There were markings on the map, indicating various spots around the house and the land surrounding it. Some of the markings were familiar, but others were strange, symbols that Nolan didn't understand. He turned the page, and the next entry caught his attention immediately. It was a letter written by someone named Arthur Halloway, the man Maeve had mentioned earlier. The letter was addressed to Maeve, but it wasn't dated. The words were simple, yet they sent a chill down Nolan's spine as he read them aloud. "If you are reading this, then the time has come. The house is more than a home, Maeve. It is a key to something much greater. The truth is buried beneath us, hidden away from the world. You must find it before it's too late." Nolan felt a shiver run through him. He looked at Maeve, who had moved closer, her eyes fixed on the journal. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Maeve didn't answer immediately. She walked over to him and placed her hand on the journal, her fingers tracing the words. "Arthur was a man of secrets," she said softly. "He believed that this house held the key to something powerful, something that could change everything. But he never had the chance to uncover it." Nolan's mind raced as he turned the pages of the journal, his fingers trembling with each new revelation. There were more maps, more letters, and even a few photographs, some of which were so old that they seemed to fade right before his eyes. Each entry added to the mystery, but it only deepened Nolan's confusion. What was it that Arthur had uncovered? And why had he kept it a secret for so long? As Nolan continued to flip through the journal, he came across a final entry that caught his attention. The words were written hastily, as if the writer had been in a rush. "The chest is the key," it read. "Inside, you will find what we've been searching for. The truth is buried, but it's close. Find it, Maeve, before the others do. Nolan closed the journal and looked up at Maeve. What others? He asked, his voice barely audible. Maeve's face was pale, and for the first time, Nolan saw a hint of fear in her eyes. There are people who want what's hidden here, she said quietly. People who will stop at nothing to get it. We need to find the rest of the truth before they do. Nolan felt a surge of determination. He didn't know what the truth was, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let anyone else get to it first. The house, the journal, and the keys, they were all part of something bigger, something that had been hidden for far too long. And he was the one who was meant to find it. I can feel the weight of the journal in my hands, the faint smell of aged paper and leather filling the air. Nolan's mind was racing. The last entry he'd read was like a puzzle piece clicking into place, but there was still so much left to uncover. He turned his gaze toward Maeve, who had grown silent, her eyes distant as she seemed lost in thought. It was as if the house itself had absorbed the last of the storm, leaving behind a kind of stillness. After a long pause, Maeve spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't stay here much longer, she said. They'll come for us. We have to move quickly. Nolan's grip tightened on the journal as he absorbed her words. The others Arthur had warned about, the ones who wanted whatever was hidden beneath this house. He could sense them now, like shadows lurking just out of sight. What exactly are we dealing with? Nolan asked. Maeve hesitated before speaking again, her voice low, almost as if she was speaking to herself. People who have been searching for what's here for generations. They believe this house holds the answers to everything. The secrets of the land, of the town, and perhaps even of life itself. Nolan absorbed the gravity of her words, his chest tightening. His life had already been full of mysteries and things left unspoken, but now he was caught in something far bigger. The house, its secrets, and the journal were the threads that connected him to something that he couldn't quite understand. What happens if they find it first? Nolan asked. Maeve's eyes darkened. They won't stop until they have it. And once they do, nothing will be the same. It could change everything. The town, the people here, even the world. Her words sent a chill down Nolan's spine, but he couldn't afford to be scared now. There was no turning back. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of time, and he was determined to uncover it. Then we find it first, Nolan said, the determination in his voice stronger than ever. Maeve nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. That's what I like to hear. They both knew what had to be done. It was time to go deeper into the house, to find what Arthur had hidden all those years ago. Nolan led the way, moving cautiously through the dark corridors, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. Ash followed closely behind, his body low to the ground, sensing the tension in the air. The walls seemed to close in around them as they moved further into the house. Nolan's heart was pounding in his chest, but he couldn't stop now. They had to reach the heart of the house, the place where the answers lay. They reached the basement door, its wood worn and creaky from years of neglect. Nolan took a deep breath, his hand resting on the handle. He looked at Maeve one last time. Are you sure you're ready for this? He asked. Maeve nodded. I've waited for this moment my entire life. Nolan opened the door slowly, the hinges protesting as they creaked. The air down below was musty, filled with the scent of dust and mildew. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the room. It was colder here, but Nolan wasn't afraid. He stepped forward, leading the way down the narrow staircase. The basement was filled with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten memories. It was dark, but the light from the bulb revealed a narrow path leading deeper into the room. At the far end of the basement, Nolan saw it. A large metal door, almost hidden behind stacks of old crates. It looked out of place in the otherwise decrepit room, its surface smooth and shiny, like it had been placed there just yesterday. He walked toward it, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Ash barked softly behind him, alert and focused. Maeve stood back, watching Nolan closely. As he reached for the door handle, his fingers brushed against the cold metal, sending a jolt through his body. The door opened easily, revealing a small room inside, its walls lined with shelves. On those shelves were objects that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Old artifacts, strange symbols, and ancient maps that could have been centuries old. But it wasn't the artifacts that caught Nolan's attention. It was the object in the center of the room. A large stone pedestal stood there, with an open book resting on top of it. The book was old, its pages yellowed with age, and its cover was etched with a symbol that Nolan recognized instantly. It was the same symbol that had appeared on the map in the journal. He stepped closer, his breath shallow, and opened the book. The first page was blank, but as he flipped through the pages, he found writing, small, neat letters that appeared to be written in a language he couldn't understand. But there, at the very end of the book, was a final note written in English. The key to everything is buried beneath the house. To unlock it, you must open the heart of the stone. Nolan's pulse quickened as he read those words. The heart of the stone, he muttered. Maeve stepped forward, her face pale. Arthur must have meant the pedestal, she said. Nolan nodded, his mind racing. The heart of the stone. It's the key to everything. They stood there, staring at the book and the pedestal, the weight of their discovery sinking in. The answers were finally within reach, but they both knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There were others who would stop at nothing to take what was hidden in this house, but Nolan was ready. Whatever it took, he would unlock the secrets of the house, no matter the cost. The air in the small, dimly lit room seemed to thicken as Nolan turned the ancient book in his hands. The pages felt brittle under his touch, but there was a pulse of energy in the air that made the weight of it all feel heavier than it should have. He had just read the words that confirmed his deepest fear. The heart of the stone was the key. His mind raced, his thoughts tumbling over one another, struggling to keep up with the gravity of what they had uncovered. Maeve stood behind him, her eyes flickering from the book to the stone pedestal at the center of the room, as if both objects were alive, calling to them. We need to open it, Nolan said, his voice low. The words felt like a command, as if they had been spoken before he even fully understood what they meant. Maeve nodded, but there was hesitation in her expression, the same hesitation that had been there when they first stepped into this house. She had known more about this place than she was willing to say, and Nolan could feel the weight of her secrets hanging in the air. Do you think it's really the key? Maeve asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Nolan paused, his fingers tracing the edge of the book. It has to be, he said firmly. We've come this far. The only way out is through. He walked toward the pedestal, Ash by his side, his amber eyes fixed on the stone as if he too knew that something significant was about to happen. The pedestal was cold to the touch, its surface smooth and unyielding. Nolan's heart pounded in his chest as he placed the book on top of it, just as it had been when he found it. The symbols on the stone glowed faintly in the low light, just enough to suggest that something was shifting beneath the surface. He took a deep breath and reached out, his fingers brushing against the stone. At first, nothing happened. But then, there was a low hum, a vibration that seemed to resonate deep within the walls of the house. It was faint, but it was there, as if the house itself was awakening. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with anticipation. Nolan glanced at Maeve, who was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. You ready? He asked. Maeve nodded once, her face pale but determined. Let's do this. With a deep breath, Nolan pressed his hands firmly against the pedestal, and the stone beneath his palms began to shift. The sound of grinding stone filled the room as the pedestal slowly parted in the center, revealing a hidden compartment deep within. Nolan stepped back in awe, his heart racing. Inside the compartment lay a small box, its surface covered in intricate carvings similar to those he had seen in the journal. The box was old, its edges worn with time, but there was no mistaking its significance. This was it. This was what they had been searching for. Nolan reached out slowly, his hands trembling as he lifted the box from its resting place. As soon as his fingers made contact with it, a sudden rush of warmth flooded his body, a surge of energy that left him breathless. The box felt alive in his hands, as if it had been waiting for him to find it. This is it, Nolan whispered. The truth. Maeve stepped forward, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. What is it? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nolan didn't answer right away. He held the box in his hands, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions that were rushing through him. He could feel the power of whatever was inside, but he wasn't sure he was ready to open it just yet. It was as if something deep inside him was urging him to wait, to hold off for just a moment longer. It's a key, he said finally, his voice low and steady. A key to everything. Maeve didn't say anything at first. She simply stared at the box, her gaze fixed on it, as if it were the most important thing in the world. Nolan's fingers hovered over the lock on the front of the box, but before he could make contact, Ash let out a soft growl, his ears flicking toward the door. Nolan's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, his hand still hovering over the box. Ash growled again, louder this time, his body tense. Nolan turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing that would explain the dog's reaction. And then, out of nowhere, the door to the room slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the house, causing the floor to tremble beneath their feet. Nolan jumped back, his heart racing, his hand instinctively clutching the box tighter. Maeve's face went pale as she backed toward the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" Nolan didn't have time to answer. The room grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly, as if the walls themselves were breathing in time with the ominous hum that seemed to surround them. Then, there was a knock. It was faint at first, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, but it grew louder with each passing second. A sharp, rhythmic knock, as if someone was waiting on the other side of the door. Nolan's eyes widened in realization. "They've found us," he whispered. He could feel it. He could feel the presence of the others, the ones who had been searching for the house's secrets for so long. They were here, and they were getting closer. Maeve's hand shot out and grabbed Nolan's arm. "We need to go," she said urgently. "Now." Nolan looked at her, his mind racing. He had the box. He had the key. But the world outside had changed. They weren't alone anymore. And whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. They were going to have to face it together. The knocking on the door grew louder, more urgent, as if whoever was on the other side was trying to break through. Nolan's heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively tightened his grip on the small box, feeling the weight of what it contained. His mind raced with thoughts, but he couldn't afford to waste time. Maeve, her face pale and wide-eyed, was pressed against the wall, her body tense as she watched the door, waiting for whatever was coming next. "We need to move," Nolan said, his voice low but firm. "They're not far behind." Maeve nodded quickly, her face filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. Nolan glanced around the room, his mind searching for any exit or escape route. The only door had just been sealed shut, and the windows were too high to reach. There was no way out unless they found another hidden passage, something buried within the house. His eyes fell on the stone pedestal where the book had once been. The pedestal now stood empty, but something about it felt different, as if it were waiting for them to make the next move. "We go deeper," Nolan said, his gaze locked on the pedestal. "We find the next secret." Maeve didn't question him. She had already seen too much to doubt his instincts. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the house as they hurried back to the hallway. Ash, who had been watching the door intently, suddenly stopped and turned his head, ears up, his eyes trained on the floor beneath him. The dog gave a low growl, the deep rumble vibrating through the floorboards. Nolan's pulse quickened. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, crouching beside Ash. The dog's nose twitched as he sniffed at the floor, his body tense. Then, with a sudden movement, Ash padded over to a section of the floor and scratched it with his paws. "This isn't just dust," Nolan muttered, his heart racing. "There's something underneath." Maeve watched as Nolan knelt and pushed aside some of the debris that had collected over the years. He pressed his palm to the floor, feeling a faint vibration, just like he had felt when they first opened the pedestal. It was subtle but undeniable, a hum in the air, the house itself seemingly alive with energy. Without another word, Nolan found the edge of a hidden hatch beneath the floorboards. It wasn't obvious at first, but the more he felt around, the more the outline of the hatch became apparent. With Ash's help, Nolan cleared the debris, revealing a metal hatch with intricate symbols etched into its surface. The symbols were similar to those Nolan had seen on the journal and the book. This was it. The next step. "Help me," Nolan said, as he grabbed the rusted handle of the hatch. Together, he and Maeve worked to lift it. It resisted at first, but with a final tug, it creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark staircase leading downward into the depths of the earth. The cold air rushed up from the passage, and a faint smell of earth and old stone filled their noses. Nolan glanced at Maeve, who nodded, her eyes resolute. "We have no choice," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We go down. There's no turning back now." They stepped into the darkness, the only sound their breath and the shuffle of their feet as they descended. The staircase was narrow and steep, its steps uneven, but they pressed on, the weight of the box still heavy in Nolan's hands. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until they reached a large chamber. The walls were covered in strange markings, almost like a map of the town, but some of the symbols didn't make sense. Nolan turned to Maeve, his voice barely a whisper. "This is it," he said. "This is the heart of the house." As they stepped further into the chamber, they saw a large stone altar at the center. It was ancient, its surface worn smooth from centuries of use, and on top of the altar sat a small, intricately carved chest, similar to the one Nolan had found earlier. This chest, however, was different. It was much smaller, but there was a sense of finality about it, as if it were the last piece of the puzzle. Maeve stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch it, but Nolan stopped her with a gentle but firm grip on her arm. "No," he said. "Let me. This is my responsibility." Maeve looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Nolan, we're in this together. Whatever's in there, we'll face it as a team." Nolan nodded, but his focus never wavered from the chest. This was it. This was the final step. Slowly, he placed the box he had found earlier on the altar next to the chest. As soon as the two objects touched, a low rumble filled the room. The ground beneath their feet shook, and Nolan instinctively pulled Maeve close. The symbols on the walls began to glow, the faint light illuminating the chamber in an eerie glow. "What's happening?" Maeve asked, her voice filled with a mix of fear and awe. "It's opening," Nolan said, his voice barely audible. "We've unlocked it." The chest on the altar began to open, slowly at first, but then more quickly, as if it had been waiting for them to make this very move. Inside, there was something that took Nolan's breath away. It wasn't just gold or jewels or any material treasure. It was a small, perfectly preserved book, much like the journal, but this one was different. Its pages were bound in silver and gold, and the cover was adorned with the same symbols Nolan had seen all throughout the house. It felt powerful, ancient, and yet strangely familiar. As he reached for it, Ash let out another low growl, his body tense. Nolan froze, his hand hovering just above the book. Something was wrong. He could feel it. "Maeve," he whispered, "I think we've just made a mistake." Maeve stepped back, her face paling as she looked at the glowing symbols on the walls. "It's not too late," she said, her voice tense. "We need to take it now, before they find us." Nolan hesitated, his fingers still hovering over the book. It was the moment of truth, and he knew, deep down, that everything was about to change. The air in the chamber grew thick with tension as Nolan's hand hovered just above the book. The symbols on the walls, once faint, now burned brightly, casting eerie shadows across the room. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the sense that everything, his past, his present, his very future, was about to change in an instant. He turned to Maeve, who was standing just behind him, her face ashen, eyes wide with fear. "Nolan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we need to take it now. We can't let them get here first." Nolan didn't respond immediately. His fingers still hovered over the book, a strange energy emanating from it. It felt like something ancient, something powerful, and something dangerous all at once. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead. The room seemed to pulse with a life of its own, like the very air was charged with electricity. Nolan's hand finally descended, and as soon as his fingers made contact with the book, a shock ran through his body. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make him freeze for a moment. Ash growled low and deep, his body tense, his eyes scanning the shadows in the room. Nolan looked up at Maeve, who took a cautious step back, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nolan turned the book over, and for the first time, he noticed the intricate design on the back cover. It was a symbol he had seen before, the same symbol that had been etched into the pedestal, the chest, and the journal. He felt a sense of recognition wash over him, though he still couldn't understand its meaning. As he opened the book, the pages seemed to turn by themselves, the movement almost fluid, as if they were being guided by an unseen force. The words on the pages were written in the same script as the journal, but this time, they seemed to glow faintly, their meaning just out of reach. "What is this?" Maeve murmured, her voice full of awe and dread. Nolan flipped through the pages, scanning the text, but the words were indecipherable. And then, as he turned one more page, something caught his eye. It was a map, but not just any map. This one showed the house, but there were markings, arrows pointing to certain rooms, certain places in the building that had never been mentioned before. One of the markings was in the basement, right under their feet. Another arrow pointed to a spot in the woods behind the house. Nolan's pulse quickened as he traced the lines with his fingers. This map was more than just a guide. It was a blueprint for something hidden, something waiting to be uncovered. "It's all connected," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Maeve leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the map. "What do we do now?" she asked. Nolan looked back at her, his gaze determined. "We follow it," he said. "We go to the basement, then we head into the woods." Maeve didn't hesitate. "Then let's go." Together, they hurried back through the winding hallways, the urgency of their mission driving them forward. Ash trotted ahead, his nose twitching, his body tense with every step. When they reached the basement door, Nolan stopped and looked at Maeve. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "We don't have a choice," she said. "We're already in too deep." Nolan opened the basement door, the familiar creak of the hinges sending a shiver down his spine. The cold, musty air rushed up to meet them, but they pressed on, the map and the journal guiding their steps. They descended the stairs carefully, the faint hum of energy growing stronger with each step. When they reached the bottom, they stood in the middle of the room, the walls lined with crates and old furniture, just as they had left it. But this time, the room felt different, like it was waiting for something. Nolan walked over to the far wall, where the map had indicated there was something hidden. He ran his fingers over the surface, looking for any sign of a hidden door or compartment. And then, with a faint click, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a small alcove. Inside the alcove was a large stone slab, covered in dust and cobwebs. Nolan's heart raced. "This is it," he said. "This is what we were meant to find." He grabbed the stone slab, and with Maeve's help, they pushed it aside, revealing a narrow passage leading down into the earth. Ash barked softly, as if urging them to hurry. They stepped into the passage, the walls closing in on them as they descended further into the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, but Nolan didn't stop. The map had led them here, and he knew they were getting closer to whatever secrets this house held. As they reached the bottom, they entered a vast underground chamber. It was unlike anything Nolan had seen before. The walls were covered in strange symbols, their meanings unclear, but the air was heavy with an unmistakable sense of power. At the center of the room stood a large stone altar, much like the one they had seen earlier, but this one was different. This one felt alive, as if it were pulsing with energy. And on the altar lay an object that Nolan couldn't take his eyes off of. It was a small, intricately carved stone, its surface smooth and cold to the touch. Nolan reached out, his fingers brushing the stone, and the moment he made contact, the room seemed to explode with light. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, the air buzzing with electricity. Maeve gasped, her hands shooting out to steady herself. "What's happening?" she shouted. Nolan didn't answer. He could feel it. Whatever was happening, it was connected to the stone, to the power beneath their feet. "It's time," Nolan said, his voice barely audible. "We've unlocked it." The stone in his hand pulsed with energy, and he knew that whatever was coming next, it would change everything. The stone in Nolan's hand pulsed with a power he could feel deep in his bones, and the moment it did, the world around him seemed to change. The chamber was no longer just a room underground. It was a living thing, vibrating with energy that radiated from the stone. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, filling the space with an ethereal light. Maeve stepped back, her eyes wide in awe and fear. "What have we unleashed?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nolan could barely hear her over the sound that had begun to hum in the air. It was low at first, a vibration that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. But as he stood there, holding the stone, the noise grew louder, more insistent. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, as if the earth itself was reacting to whatever force they had awakened. "It's not what we've unleashed," Nolan whispered, his grip tightening around the stone. "It's what we've found." As soon as he spoke those words, the walls around them seemed to shift. They groaned with an ancient creak, like the house was waking up from a long slumber. Ash, who had been quietly by Nolan's side, now growled, low and guttural, his hackles raised in warning. Nolan turned his gaze to the dog, but Ash wasn't looking at him. The dog was staring at the far side of the chamber, his body rigid with alertness. The air was thick with an energy Nolan couldn't explain, and he felt a cold shiver creep down his spine. Something was coming. He just didn't know what. "We need to get out of here," Maeve said, her voice filled with urgency. But before Nolan could respond, the stone in his hand began to glow brighter, and the ground beneath them shifted violently. They both staggered, struggling to keep their balance as the floor cracked open. A deep rumbling sound filled the air as part of the stone floor fell away, revealing a hidden passage below. A blinding light poured up from the opening, its intensity so sharp that Nolan had to shield his eyes. The noise stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet after the storm, the eerie calm that followed a violent eruption. Nolan and Maeve stood frozen, the stone still glowing in his hand. The light from the hidden passage was softer now, no longer blinding, but still powerful. Someone, was waiting for them down there. "Do you feel that?" Nolan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maeve nodded, her eyes wide. "I do. It's like the house is calling us." Without another word, they made their way toward the opening, Ash leading the way, his body low to the ground as he moved silently. Nolan felt a strange pull in his chest, the sensation of being drawn to something inevitable. Whatever waited for them in that passage, whatever secret the house held, was something they couldn't turn away from now. They stepped carefully into the passage, the air growing colder the further they descended. It felt like they were walking deeper into the earth itself, away from everything they had known. The walls were smooth, unlike the rough, crumbling stone above, and the floor was solid, no longer shaking with the power they had awakened. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened up into a large, circular chamber. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, much like the one they had seen in the house above, but this one was different. It was made of a dark, polished stone, and on top of it lay a small, delicate box. It seemed to hum with energy, much like the stone Nolan had found. The closer they got to the pedestal, the stronger the pull became, until Nolan felt as if his very soul was being drawn toward it. Maeve stopped next to him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "This is it, isn't it?" she asked. Nolan didn't answer right away. He was too focused on the box. He had seen its like before, on the maps, in the journal. This was the heart of the house, the center of the mystery that had brought him here. Whatever secrets the house had held, whatever had been hidden beneath it all, was here, waiting to be uncovered. He stepped forward, his fingers trembling as he reached out for the box. As soon as his hand made contact, the chamber filled with a low, resonating sound, like a bell ringing in the distance. The box lifted slightly from the pedestal, as if responding to his touch. Nolan felt his pulse quicken. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. The secret was finally within his reach. He lifted the box carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hands. As he opened it, the air around them seemed to freeze. Inside was a single, ancient key, its surface covered in strange symbols. The key seemed to pulse with power, the same energy that had filled the house and the chamber. As Nolan held it, he felt a deep sense of understanding wash over him. This was what had been hidden all these years. This was the key to everything. He closed his fingers around it, the weight of its significance heavy in his grasp. "It's time," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and wonder. Maeve stepped closer, her gaze locked on the key in his hand. "What do we do now?" she asked. Nolan didn't answer immediately. He was still absorbing the enormity of the moment. They had unlocked the secret of the house, but there was still one final piece to uncover. They had the key, but it wasn't just a key to a lock. It was the key to something far greater, something that would change everything. "We finish what we started," Nolan said, his voice steady with resolve. "We unlocked the final secret." He turned toward the far side of the chamber, where another door stood, its surface covered in the same symbols as the key. The door was the final obstacle, and with the key in his hand, Nolan knew it was time to move forward. This was the last step, and whatever lay beyond that door would change everything. They were ready. The door in front of Nolan was massive, made of dark wood with intricate carvings that matched the symbols from the key. It felt like the weight of centuries was pressing down on it, as though the door had waited for this moment for as long as it had been locked away. The air around them was thick with tension, and the faint hum of the stone in Nolan's hand vibrated through his chest, urging him forward. He could feel the power of the key, the weight of what it represented, and the urgency of what was about to unfold. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, the key cool against his palm. Maeve stood close behind him, her eyes watching him carefully, the same look of fear and hope mirrored in her face. She didn't need to say anything. They both knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for. Nolan reached out and placed the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for this door and no other. As he turned the key, the ground beneath them seemed to shudder. The door groaned, its ancient hinges creaking loudly as the lock gave way. For a brief moment, the world felt suspended in time. Then, with a final, resounding click, the door swung open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. The moment the door opened, the hum in the air grew louder, more pronounced. The space behind the door was shrouded in darkness, but Nolan could feel something moving in the shadows, something alive. The temperature in the room dropped, and the familiar sense of unease from earlier crept back into his bones. He could feel that they were not alone. "Let's go," Nolan whispered, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline surging through him. Ash stepped forward first, his body low to the ground as he sniffed the air, clearly sensing something. Nolan and Maeve followed, their footsteps slow and careful as they entered the darkened passage. The walls on either side of them were smooth and cold to the touch, and the further they walked, the darker it became. It was as if the very air was suffocating them, pressing them forward. The deeper they went, the more the sense of being watched intensified. Nolan could feel the weight of unseen eyes on him, studying him, measuring him. "Do you feel that?" Maeve asked in a hushed tone, her voice barely a whisper. Nolan nodded, his throat dry. "It's like we're not supposed to be here." The passage seemed to stretch on forever, its length unknowable in the dim light. Then, at the very end of the corridor, a faint glow appeared, a soft blue light that pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. As they drew closer, the glow grew brighter, illuminating the walls around them with an eerie, ethereal light. Finally, they reached the source of the light. In the center of the small chamber ahead, an altar stood, bathed in the blue glow. It was made of a strange stone, unlike anything Nolan had seen before. The symbols on it were even more complex, more intricate than the ones they had encountered earlier, and they seemed to move, shifting like liquid as they glowed with an unnatural light. On the altar lay an object, cloaked in shadows. It was small, but its presence seemed to fill the entire room. Nolan approached it cautiously, his hand still gripping the key, the box he had discovered earlier now feeling impossibly heavy in his other hand. He didn't know why, but he felt as though this was the final test. This was where everything would be revealed. "What do you think it is?" Maeve asked, her voice trembling. Nolan didn't answer at first. He was too focused on the object. The closer he got, the more he felt drawn to it, like something was pulling at him, urging him to pick it up. He could feel the connection between the symbols, the stone, the key, and whatever lay on the altar. It was as if everything in this house, in this entire town, had been leading to this moment. His fingers brushed against the object, and a sudden jolt of energy shot through his body. His mind swirled with visions, flashes of images too fast to fully comprehend, voices whispering in languages he couldn't understand. But one image stood out above all: the house, burning, consumed by flames, and standing in its center, a figure watching it all, its face obscured in shadow. Nolan pulled his hand away, his heart racing. "What was that?" Maeve asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Nolan said, still shaken. "But whatever it is, it's not what I expected." He reached out again, this time with both hands, and lifted the object from the altar. It was a small stone orb, smooth and cool to the touch. Its surface was covered in carvings similar to those on the altar, but there was something else, something hidden within the orb, just out of reach. As soon as he held it, The pulsing blue light intensified, flooding the room with a blinding light. Nolan shielded his eyes, and when he opened them again, he saw that the walls of the chamber were no longer just stone. They had transformed, becoming translucent, like glass, allowing him to see beyond them. Outside, the world was changing. The house, the land, even the sky, everything was shifting, warping in a way that felt both unnatural and familiar. He looked down at the orb in his hands, realizing that it was the source of the transformation. The power it held was more than just physical. It was tied to everything around him, to the very fabric of reality itself. "Nolan," Maeve whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. "What have we done?" Nolan's eyes widened as he realized the full scope of their actions. They hadn't just unlocked the secrets of the house. They had unlocked something far more powerful, something that could change everything. He gripped the orb tightly, feeling the weight of the decision he now had to make. There was no going back. The orb held the power to reshape everything, to alter the course of history, and it was now in his hands. And with it, the fate of everything that had been hidden in this house, and everything that had yet to be discovered, was in his hands. The room seemed to vibrate with energy as Nolan held the stone orb, its surface pulsating with an unnatural light. Maeve stepped back, her face a mixture of awe and fear. The walls of the chamber were no longer just stone. They had become something else entirely, shifting and glowing with the power of the orb. Nolan could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the realization that they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "Nolan, what is happening?" Maeve whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum that filled the room. "I don't know," Nolan said, his grip tightening on the orb. "But I think we've awakened something more than we bargained for." He could feel the power of the stone coursing through him, a strange, unfamiliar energy that seemed to be rewriting the very fabric of reality around them. The air was thick with it, and the chamber seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in time with the pulse of the orb. Ash, ever vigilant, growled low in his throat, his body tense. The dog was reacting to the change in the air, to the power that was surging through the room. Nolan looked around, his eyes scanning the now translucent walls of the chamber. He could see the land beyond, but it wasn't the same land he had seen earlier. The sky had shifted from a clear blue to an ominous shade of red, and the trees in the distance seemed to writhe, their branches twisting and bending in unnatural ways. "This is wrong," Maeve said, her voice shaking. "We've disturbed something we shouldn't have." Nolan nodded, his heart racing. "I know, but I don't think we can stop it now." The orb in his hands felt heavier now, its power growing stronger with every passing second. Nolan could feel the pull of it, the way it seemed to be calling him, urging him to unlock the next step. But as much as he knew that they had to keep moving forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. The vibrations in the air grew stronger, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble once more. "We need to get out of here," Maeve said urgently, grabbing Nolan's arm. "Before it's too late." Nolan shook his head, his mind still focused on the orb. "We can't leave now. Not without understanding what we've unleashed." The chamber around them seemed to darken, the shadows growing longer, as if the very room was reacting to the power they had disturbed. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The orb grew still in Nolan's hands, its light dimming to a soft glow. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that felt like a warning, like the calm before a storm. And then, from the far corner of the room, a figure appeared. It was tall and cloaked in darkness, its features obscured by the shadows. Nolan's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The one who had been watching, the one who had been waiting for them to make their move. Maeve stepped in front of Nolan instinctively, her body tense with readiness. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear that was rising in her chest. The figure didn't speak at first. It simply stood there, its presence heavy in the room. Then, slowly, it lifted a hand, and the shadows around it seemed to pulse, as if alive. "I am the keeper," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, like an echo from the past. "The keeper of the truth you have awakened." Nolan felt the weight of the words settle in his chest, the understanding that they had crossed into something far beyond their control. The keeper took a step forward, its movements deliberate and slow. "You are not meant To be here, the figure continued. But now that you have opened the door, there is no turning back. Nolan felt a chill run down his spine. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice tight. The keeper tilted its head, a movement that was almost human, but not quite. I want nothing, it said. But you have awakened the power that has slept for centuries. And now you must understand what you have done. The keeper extended its hand, and the room seemed to grow even darker, the shadows deepening around them. You have unlocked the heart of this house, the figure continued. But the heart does not give its secrets freely. It demands a price. Nolan's grip on the orb tightened, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. What price? Maeve asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. The keeper's shadowy figure loomed closer. The price of knowledge, it said, its voice echoing with an ancient power. To understand the truth, you must give something in return. The truth does not come without sacrifice. Nolan felt the weight of its words settle in his chest. He had already given so much, his time, his energy, his life, and now, it seemed, he had to give even more. The figure stepped closer still, until it was just a few feet from them. Nolan could feel the chill of its presence, the coldness that seemed to seep into his very bones. What is the truth? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The keeper didn't answer immediately. It simply stared at them, its eyes hidden in the shadows. And then, finally, it spoke again. The truth is not what you expect, it said. It is a weapon, a force that has been buried for centuries. And now, you have become its bearers. Nolan's mind raced as the weight of the keeper's words settled in. A weapon. They had uncovered a weapon, something that could change the world, or destroy it. The responsibility was more than he could fully comprehend. What do we do now? Maeve asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The keeper's gaze shifted to her, and for a brief moment, it almost seemed like it was studying her, measuring her worth. Now, it said, you must decide. Will you wield the weapon you have uncovered, or will you bury it again, hidden away forever? The choice is yours, but choose wisely. The fate of all will rest in your hands. The chamber fell silent once more, and Nolan could feel the weight of that choice pressing down on him. The power was now in his hands. What would he do with it? What would they do with it? They had uncovered the truth, but now they had to decide if they would use it or let it be forgotten once more. The chamber was silent, the air thick with the weight of the choice that hung in the balance. Nolan stood still, the stone orb heavy in his hands, and the keeper's words echoing in his mind. He could feel Maeve standing beside him, the tension radiating from her as she waited for him to make the decision. The power, the weapon, was now in his hands. It had been hidden for centuries, and now, he and Maeve were the ones who had uncovered it. But the keeper's warning still lingered in the air, a stark reminder that knowledge came with a price. The weight of the decision felt unbearable, and Nolan could feel the pressure mounting as the keeper's gaze remained fixed on him. What do we do, Nolan? Maeve whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. Nolan looked down at the orb, his fingers still clutching it tightly. The choice seemed impossible. Could they really wield this power? Could they control something so ancient, so dangerous? Or would they be better off leaving it buried, never to be used? He thought of everything they had gone through, the countless steps they had taken to get to this point. The house, the journal, the maps, the orb, all of it had led them here. But where would it lead them next? We have to decide, Nolan said, his voice quiet but resolute. If we keep this, we risk everything. But if we bury it again, we might never know the truth. He paused, his mind racing. But what if the truth is too dangerous? Maeve's eyes were filled with uncertainty, but she didn't look away from him. What if the truth is the only way to save everything we care about? She asked, her voice steady. Nolan swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of her words, and for the first time, he realized that this wasn't just about them. It was about the world outside. These walls. The keeper's warning echoed in his ears. The fate of all will rest in your hands. He looked at Maeve, then back at the orb, his mind made up. We can't keep running from the truth, Nolan said, his voice growing stronger. We have to face it. We have to use the power, not for us, but for everyone. Maeve nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Then we do it together, she said. Nolan took a deep breath and stepped forward, moving towards the pedestal where the keeper had stood. The room around them seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. He placed the orb back onto the pedestal, and as soon as it made contact, the symbols on the walls flared to life, glowing brighter than ever before. The chamber hummed with a deep, resonating energy, and Nolan could feel it coursing through his veins, filling him with an overwhelming sense of power. But with that power came something else, a sense of responsibility, a realization that this was more than just a discovery. This was a burden. The keeper's voice echoed again, but this time, it was no longer a warning. It was a command. "You have unlocked the power," the keeper said, its form now fully visible in the center of the room. "But with this power comes a choice that will affect all who live. You must decide how to wield it." Nolan's heart raced as the keeper's presence filled the room. The figure was taller than either of them, its features still obscured in shadow, but its power was undeniable. "What do we do with it?" Nolan asked, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. The keeper extended a hand, and the shadows in the room shifted, revealing a doorway in the far corner. "The power you have unlocked is not just a weapon," the keeper explained. "It is a key to the past and to the future. It holds the answers to all the questions you seek, but it also holds the potential to destroy everything." Nolan felt the gravity of those words sink in. This was no simple decision. If they chose to unlock the full potential of the orb, they would be unleashing something that could reshape the world itself. But if they chose to let it lie dormant, they would be forever bound by the uncertainty of what could have been. "You must choose wisely," the keeper said, its voice low and commanding. "The path you take will decide the fate of all who follow." Nolan stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could feel the power of the orb in his hands, a force so vast that it seemed to stretch beyond the limits of his understanding. He looked at Maeve, who stood beside him, her face filled with determination. "We can't let fear stop us," she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "We have to trust that we can control this." Nolan nodded slowly, his mind made up. "We'll use the power," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "But we'll use it wisely. We won't let it control us." The keeper's form seemed to nod in approval, and the shadows around them began to recede. The room began to shift once more, the symbols on the walls dimming as the power of the orb settled into a steady, controlled hum. "The choice has been made," the keeper said. "Now, you must carry the weight of it. The power is yours to wield, but remember, with great power comes great responsibility." The chamber grew silent, and Nolan felt the weight of the orb in his hand. It was no longer just an object of mystery. It was a force that would shape their future, for better or for worse. He and Maeve had made their decision. Now, they would face whatever came next, together. The orb in Nolan's hand felt heavier than ever, its power a constant, pulsing reminder of the decision they had made. The chamber, once dark and ominous, now seemed to breathe in time with the rhythm of the energy that surrounded them. The keeper's form had faded, leaving only the echoes of its voice lingering in the air. It was as though the house itself was listening, waiting for the next move. Nolan and Maeve stood side by side, their eyes locked on the now glowing altar where the orb had once rested. There was no going back, no undoing what they had done. The choice had been made, and with it came the responsibility of wielding the power they had unlocked. The question was no longer whether they could control it, but whether they would use it wisely. Nolan felt the weight of the key in his pocket, the one he had carried through this entire journey. It had opened the doors to the house, to the secrets it held, but it also symbolized the weight of what they had discovered, what they had yet to discover. "What now?" Maeve asked softly, her voice filled with the same uncertainty that Nolan felt in his heart. "We take it one step at a time," Nolan said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked around the chamber, his mind running through everything they had learned, everything they had uncovered. The house, the orb, the power they had released. It was all part of something much bigger than themselves. They had become the keepers of a secret so vast, so ancient, that it had the potential to change the world. But change came with risks, and Nolan knew that. The orb had given them the ability to shape the future, but it was up to them how they used it. "We don't know everything yet," Nolan continued, his gaze falling on the glowing symbols on the walls, now dimming but still powerful. "There's still more to uncover. But we don't have to do it alone." Maeve nodded, her eyes filled with the same determination that had brought them this far. "Together," she said, her voice unwavering. As they stood in the chamber, the air around them seemed to settle, the energy in the room calming, as though the house itself had accepted their choice. The symbols on the walls faded to a soft glow, no longer pulsing with the intensity they had held before. It was as if the house had breathed a sigh of relief, the power they had awakened now under their control. The weight of the orb in Nolan's hands had lessened, but the responsibility it carried was still as heavy as ever. He looked at Maeve, his heart filled with a mix of resolve and uncertainty. "We can't let the power control us," he said. "We have to control it. For the good of everyone." Maeve smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "We will," she said. Together, they turned and made their way back through the chamber, the path before them uncertain but clear. The house was no longer a place of darkness and mystery. It was a place of knowledge, of power, and of potential. The secrets it held had been uncovered, but the journey was far from over. They had the orb, they had the knowledge, and they had each other. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The orb had given them a choice, and now, armed with the truth, they were ready to make it count. As they emerged from the chamber and stepped back into the house, the weight of the past seemed to lift from their shoulders. The house was no longer just a structure of stone and wood. It was alive with purpose, and so were they. They had unlocked its secrets, but more importantly, they had unlocked their own potential. The journey had brought them here, but the real journey had only just begun. As the door to the house closed behind them, Nolan and Maeve stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The world outside had changed, but so had they. And whatever they did with the power they now possessed, they would do it together.